Hi guys, and welcome back to Slice of Mike. So today I'm doing my May wrap-up, which includes stuff that I've read completely and stuff that I've partly read, and that is because I'm doing some buddy reads this month, and some of those buddy read buddies just haven't been reading the books as quickly as they promised they would be. Alexis, I'm looking at you. But that's okay, I still have a ton to talk about, and let's start with the things that I've read completely. First on that list is Stories for the Nighttime and Some for the Day by Ben Laurie. This is a collection of short stories that I read as a buddy read with Monica over at Soph Blueberry. I was really excited to read this book because it was recommended to me by somebody I go to book club with, and it was described as a collection of weird short stories, which sounded perfect for me. I think I would have to read this again in order to establish a really concrete opinion about it, because it was a very fast read, which is good, but I also don't have a lot of complex thoughts about it. It is very weird, which I enjoyed. There are stories about octopi who live on land, and talking televisions, and UFOs, and aliens, and just a bunch of crazy stuff. One thing I really appreciated about this book, though, is that it reminded me a lot of Ray Bradbury, who's one of my favorite authors, and I actually had this really surreal moment where I was thinking that, and then I turned the page and the next chapter, or the next story was just called Ray Bradbury's Inspiration or something. Like, it was clearly a tribute to Ray Bradbury, so points to me, I guess, but also that was kind of creepy. I gave this book a 4-star rating on Goodreads. In real life, I gave it 3.5 stars, so that is rounded up to 4 stars. I thought it was decent, but it wasn't the best collection of short stories that I have read. And if you're looking for weird short stories, I would recommend Karen Russell. She's written 2 collections called Vampires in the Lemon Grove and St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves, and those are both great collections of strange, quirky stories, and I highly recommend both of those collections. The next book I read is So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson, and this was nonfiction. I picked this up because since joining BookTube, I have gotten really involved in social media. I didn't use Twitter or Instagram before BookTube, and being on YouTube and posting videos, I've been a lot more conscious lately about my online persona and the sort of materials that I am posting. So essentially, this book is about the online shaming phenomenon and kind of the role that we play, but also the role that people play in posting the material themselves. And it was just a discussion of whether or not that shaming is right or wrong, and kind of alternatives to that shaming. There was some really interesting stuff in this book that I didn't know before reading it, like the fact that there is an online brand management reputation industry or something like that, where people will essentially post false things online in order to bury some of your darker tweets and Facebook posts and things that you don't want people to find. It's like a science fiction movie, but I think it's also fascinating because the stuff didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. I gave this book 5 stars out of 5. I thought it was really, really interesting, and I read it in a day. It reminded me a lot of Malcolm Gladwell's books, so if you like anything written by Malcolm Gladwell, I think this is definitely something that you might like. The next book that I read was crazy, and that is Grasshopper Jungle by Andrew Smith, which is about 2 boys living in Iowa during the end of the world, and basically giant bugs are trying to eat people and take over the planet. So the story is about them fighting the bugs and also trying to figure out their feelings for one another and whether or not they're friends or maybe something more than friends. There are so many dogs barking right now. I can't handle it. Anyways, if you want to hear my full thoughts on the book, I did a separate review video for Grasshopper Jungle, so I will link that in this video, and then also I'll provide the link for you down in the description box below if you're interested in hearing more about my thoughts on the book. And the dog is still barking, so that's fun. The next book that I read is Firefight by Brandon Sanderson, which is the second book in his Reckoners series, and I really like this one. I think I liked it even better than the first one because there was more character development and a greater depth of plot. So this series is about a comet or some sort of airborne space object that comes into Earth's orbit and turns certain people into superheroes. However, these powers that these people get corrupt their minds completely and they all become villains. This is a land that is completely devoid of superheroes. Everyone is a supervillain, so people understandably live in a pretty terrible world and they have to deal with these supervillain overlords. Originally when I read Steelheart, I loved the idea of this world where there are no superheroes because I've always thought that if I had superpowers, I'd probably be tempted to do bad things with them, not just, you know, the nice things. So I like the idea that this is a world where everybody sucks and you can't trust anybody and everybody is just awful and evil. I don't know what that says about me, so yeah. I also like the setting in the second book more than I did in the first book. In the first book, they're in Chicago, which is completely made out of steel now. In this book, they visit different cities, one of which is a half-submerged city with glowing graffiti and plants that grow inside, and they have glowing fruit, and it's just It was more of a visually appealing and kind of wacky environment, so I liked that more than I did in the first book. I also liked this book more than the first book because we get to hear more about Firefight, who is David's kind of girlfriend, but not really. She's struggling with her powers, and we get to learn more about what it is to be a supervillain in this world, and kind of the fact that these people don't have a choice. If they don't use their powers, they'll go crazy, and that kind of thing. So I really, really did enjoy this one. My one main problem with this series in general is that the main character, David, is just so incredibly goofy, and I have a really hard time relating to kind of the funny main character. I also had this problem with John Scalzi's Fuzzy Nation because that guy, John Holloway I think his name is, he just is cracking jokes left and right, but to me they're just not always funny. So I kind of like to find the humor in books that isn't directly meant to be humor, if that makes sense. I do recommend this book because it has a lot of great action and it is highly original. However, it is a bit silly in my opinion, so that might get on your nerves at certain points of the book. The next book that I read is Lev Grossman's The Magician's Land, which is the final book in his Magician's trilogy, and this was just the best. It was just the best. I loved it so much. I don't want to say too much about this book and spoil you for the entire series, but I did really like this one because we get to revisit locations that we haven't been to since the first book. All the characters are just so wonderful in the series, even when they're being complete buttheads to each other. They're just so relatable and human, and I love each and every one of them. So please go pick the series up if you haven't started it already. I highly recommend it. I gave this book 5 stars out of 5. It was my absolute favorite in the series, but the series itself is just perfect. I've given every book in the series 5 stars out of 5, and I recommend it to you. If you can handle a bit darker of a series, I think you'll really enjoy this. I also read a few graphic novels in the month of May. The first one is This One Summer by Jillian Tamaki and Mariko Tamaki, and this was a story about 2 girls who visit the beach every summer with their families. This book was nothing like what I expected. I went into it kind of thinking it'd be a murder mystery type thing with maybe a supernatural element thrown in there, but no, that was nothing like what this book was. The thing I liked about this book is that it follows the 2 young girls, but it also has these side storylines pertaining to certain adults, like the girls' parents, and also there's this like teen pregnancy thing going on. So you get to hear about these stories, but you also are restricted by how much you learn about them because you have to follow these 2 young girls around, and obviously they're not always interested in listening to adults talk about their lives. This is not in any way a feel-good story. I would not recommend this to you if you're looking for a light, summery read because it is the exact opposite. This was definitely one of the best graphic novels I've read this year so far, and I would give this 5 stars out of 5 for sure. The next graphic novel I read is Nimona by Noelle Stevenson, which apparently was a web comic or something before it was published in this physical form. So Nimona is about a young shapeshifter named Nimona who teams up with Lord Blackheart, who is kind of the supervillain in a strange hybrid medieval / super science fiction-y world, and they both want to take down the guy who rules the city. You don't really figure out why Nimona is teaming up with Lord Blackheart until later on in the book, but I really enjoyed her special sense of humor. She is a funny girl, and she also has the ability to shapeshift into creatures and animals to kind of highlight her humor. There's kind of this unspoken emotional conflict going on between Blackheart, who's the villain, and I think Sir Goldenloin, who's the hero, and they have something of a deeper relationship than what first appears on the surface. I didn't really care for the plot. I thought that part was a bit shallow, but I really did enjoy the characters, and by the end of the book I felt very attached to specifically Blackheart and Nimona. I thought those were great characters, so I do recommend this to you, but it is kind of a very quick, light read. And then finally I read some comics in the month of May, including East of West Volume 3 and Volumes 2 and 3 in the Saga series, and these are both 2 of my current favorite series, so I've really enjoyed them, and I think I'm all caught up with East of West, perhaps, but I do know there's one more volume of Saga out right now, so I do plan on picking that up ASAP. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of my May wrap-up. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you've read any of the books that I have talked about today, or if you plan on reading them, let me know about that in the comment section below. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you all later. Bye!